The sound of the blade is how I know the world is still there. That scraping noise, steel on asphalt, a rhythmic shh clunk as the carbide teeth bite into the ice pack. It's a violent sound, really. You're tearing the frozen skin off the earth so people can drive their sedans to get milk and bread. But to me, inside the cab, it's a heartbeat. My name is Elias. I push snow. That's the job. That's the life. Before the sky turned that impossible shade of violet and the radio went dead, I was just the grader guy. I operate a Caterpillar 140M road grader. It's not a pickup truck with a plastic plow bolted to the front. It's 30 feet of yellow iron, 6-wheel drive, articulating frame with a 12-foot moldboard blade underneath and a massive V-plow on the nose. It weighs 40,000 pounds dry. When I'm full of fuel and carrying the wing plow, I'm tipping the scales at 60,000. I live in the cab of this machine. It smells like stale coffee, hydraulic fluid, and wet wool. And right now, it's the only thing keeping me from shattering into a million pieces like a dropped dinner plate. If you're listening to this, stay away from the windows. Don't look at the snow. If you hear a chiming sound, like wind chimes made of broken glass, turn off your lights and pray your engine block stays warm. Let me tell you how the long winter started. It started on a Tuesday, mid-February. Up here in the Upper Peninsula, February is usually when the patience runs out. The snowbanks are already 8 feet high, turned gray and hard by the exhaust and the thaw-freeze cycle. The tourists are gone, the locals are drinking too much, and the county budget for salt is running on fumes. I was on the night shift. My run is County Road 550, a 2-lane stretch of blacktop that winds through dense pine forests and skirting the edge of Lake Superior. It's a lonely run. No street lights, just the tunnel of white created by my high beams and the strobe lights pulsing yellow off the trees. I had the heater cranked up to the second setting, not high. High makes you sweat, and sweat gets cold when you step out, but just enough to keep the frost off the inside of the glass. I had a thermos of black coffee in the cup holder, vibration-proof, bolted to the console. The forecast called for a historic low-pressure system. That's what the weatherman from Marquette said. He used words like polar vortex and atmospheric compression. To me, it just meant overtime. I reached down and adjusted the lever for the wing plow. The hydraulics whined a high-pitched ree as the side blade dropped, shaving the top foot of snow off the bank to make room for the fresh stuff. County 4 to base, I keyed the mic. The radio was an old Motorola unit that had seen better days. The cord was stretched out like a slinky. "Go ahead, Elias," dispatch came back. It was Sarah. She'd been running the night board for 20 years. Her voice sounded like cigarette smoke and patience. "I'm turning around at the Big Bay limit. Snow is coming down heavy. Flakes are weird, small, hard, like sand." "Copy that, Elias," Sarah replied. "Radar shows the main cell hitting in 20 minutes. It's a purple blob on the screen, Elias. Never seen purple before. Be careful out there. Temp is dropping fast. We're already at -10 at the depot." -10? I glanced at my dashboard thermometer. It read -5. "Roger that. I'll do one pass south and head for the barn." I hung up the mic. I looked out the side window. The snow wasn't drifting down like feathers. It was driving hard, straight horizontal lines. And Sarah was right. It sounded different. Usually snow is quiet. It muffles sound. But this sounded like someone was throwing handfuls of rice against the windshield. Tick, 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 tick. I shifted the transmission into 5th gear, bringing the beast up to a roaring 25 miles per hour. The diesel engine, a C9 Acert, rumbled beneath the floorboards.
That engine is a marvel of engineering. It generates torque that can push a house off its foundation. I trusted that engine more than I trusted most people. I didn't know it yet, but that engine was about to get tested in ways the manual never covered.
20 minutes later, the world ended. It didn't end with an explosion or a mushroom cloud. It ended with a color. I was coming around a bend near the Harlow Lake trailhead when the sky shifted. Even at night, you can see the sky because of the snow reflection. It went from a heavy charcoal gray to a vivid, sickly violet. Then the temperature gauge on my dash caught my eye. Modern heavy equipment has digital readouts. Mine was flickering. -12, -18, -25. I tapped the glass with a gloved knuckle. Sensors busted, I muttered. Then it hit -40. Then -55. Then the screen just displayed 3 dashes. Dash, dash, dash. It had bottomed out. At the same moment, the windshield fogged over. Not on the outside, but on the inside. The moisture from my breath froze instantly against the glass. I grabbed a rag and scraped it, but it bloomed back in seconds. The heater, which had been keeping me cozy, suddenly felt like someone was blowing gently through a straw. The engine note changed. The deep, throaty rumble became harder, clattering. Diesel fuel gels at low temperatures if you don't treat it right. I had winter blend in the tank, good to -30, maybe 40 with the additives, but the engine was struggling. I could hear the injectors hammering. "Come on, old girl," I whispered, slamming the transmission down a gear to keep the RPMs up. "Don't you quit on me." I reached for the radio. "Base, this is County 4. My temp gauge is bottomed out. Engine is running rough. I'm seeing, I don't know, the trees look wrong." Static. "Base, this is Elias. Do you copy?" Static. But not the white noise static of an empty channel. It was a rhythmic static. Crunch. Hiss. Crunch. Hiss. Like footsteps in dry snow, but amplified 1,000 times. I slowed the grader down to a crawl. Visibility was 0. My high beams were just reflecting off a wall of white that sparkled like diamond dust. That's when I saw the sedan. It was a late-model Toyota, maybe blue, sitting dead center in my lane. I slammed on the brakes. The grader slid. 60,000 pounds of momentum doesn't stop on a dime on ice. But the chains on the 6 rear tires bit in, and I shuddered to a halt about 10 feet from the car's bumper. I sat there for a moment, heart hammering. My first instinct was the old instinct, assist the motorist. I popped the parking brake. The air release sound, psss, was sharp in the cab. I zipped my heavy high-vis parka all the way to the chin, pulled my wool hat down, and grabbed my flashlight. I opened the cab door. The cold hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just cold air, it was a vacuum. It sucked the heat out of my eyes, my lungs, my skin instantly. My nostrils froze shut on the first inhale. It felt like inhaling broken glass. I stumbled down the metal steps of the grader, my boots crunching on the asphalt. The sound was wrong. It was too loud. The asphalt shouldn't crunch. I walked toward the Toyota. The engine was dead. No lights. I shined my flashlight beam through the rear window. It refracted weirdly, splitting into rainbows. I realized the glass wasn't just frosted, it was micro-fractured, thousands of tiny spider webs. I reached the driver's side door. "County Road Commission," I shouted. My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the air. "You okay in there?" I grabbed the door handle. It snapped off in my hand. Not the plastic, the metal. The steel sheared off like a dry twig. I stared at the jagged piece of metal in my glove. Metal gets brittle in extreme cold, sure, but this was liquid nitrogen cold. I used the sleeve of my coat to wipe the side window. I put my face close to the glass and shined the light inside. There was a man in the driver's seat. He was wearing a fleece jacket. His hands were on the steering wheel. He was looking straight ahead. His eyes were open. They were white, not rolled back, but frozen. The fluid in his eyes had crystallized. His skin was a pale, translucent blue, like skim milk. But the worst part was that he had shattered. A crack ran from his left temple, down his cheek, through his jaw, and down his neck. It wasn't a cut, it was a structural failure. He looked like a statue made of cheap porcelain that someone had tapped with a hammer. He wasn't bleeding. Everything inside him was solid. I scrambled back, slipping on the ice, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps that hurt my chest. Get back in the cab. Get back in the cab. I turned to run back to the grader. That's when I heard it. Above the wind, above the idling clatter of my diesel engine. Chime, chime, scrape, scrape. It was coming from the tree line. Something tall, something that moved with the jerky, jagged motion of a stop-motion skeleton. I swung my flashlight toward the pines. For a second, I saw it. It looked like a praying mantis made of icicles and obsidian. It was huge, maybe 8 feet tall, standing on 4 spindly legs. It blended in perfectly with the frozen branches, except for the way the light caught its edges. It didn't have eyes. It had a cluster of faceted crystals where a head should be. It turned toward me. I didn't wait to see if it was friendly. I scrambled up the metal steps of the grader, slipping, bashing my shin against the steel grating. I threw myself into the seat and slammed the door. I locked it, as if a lock matters against something like that. I slammed the transmission into gear. Move, move, move! I screamed at the machine. The grader groaned. The tires spun, chains digging into the pavement, throwing sparks. We lurched forward. I had to go around the Toyota. I swung the massive steering wheel. The V-plow clipped the rear bumper of the frozen car. The car didn't dent. It exploded. It shattered into 1,000,000 pieces of metal, plastic, and glass, spraying across the road like confetti. I didn't look back. I throttled up, pushing the diesel engine to the red line. The temperature gauge was still showing 3 dashes. The heater was losing the battle. The frost was creeping in from the corners of the windshield, making my view smaller and smaller. I had 10 miles to the depot. 10 miles of frozen hell, with something hunting in the trees that sounded like wind chimes.
The drive back to the depot was a blur of adrenaline and technical management. I couldn't just floor it. If I blew a hydraulic line or overheated the transmission, I was dead. I had to drive delicately, managing the RPMs, watching the oil pressure. The grader is a beast, but it's an exposed beast. The cab is glass on all sides, great for visibility when you're plowing, terrible when you're trying to hide. I felt like a fish in a bowl. Every shadow that the strobe lights cast looked like one of those things. I kept checking the mirrors. I swear I saw shapes loping along the ditch line, keeping pace with me at 30 miles an hour. They moved effortlessly, skimming over the deep snow, while I had to fight for every inch of traction. Finally, the yard lights of the County Road Commission depot appeared through the swirling white. We call it the barn. It's a massive corrugated steel building where we park the plows, the loaders, and the salt trucks. It has a heated break room, a mechanic's bay, and a backup generator. It looked like salvation. I pulled into the yard.
Usually, there are motion-activated floodlights. They were out. The whole yard was dark. I steered the grader toward the main bay door. Bay 3, that was my spot. I saw the door was open. Not all the way, just about 4 feet from the ground. The heavy roll-up door had been stuck or stopped halfway. I stopped the machine about 20 yards out. I idled. The vibration of the engine shook the coffee in my thermos. "Base? Sarah? This is Elias. I'm in the yard." Silence. "Is anybody there?" Nothing but that rhythmic static on the radio. I had a choice. I could stay in the cab, run the engine until the fuel ran out, maybe 12 hours, or I could go inside, try to get the generator running, try to find Sarah and the others, try to find a weapon. The cab was getting colder. My breath was clouding the air so thick I could barely see the gauges. If the engine died out here, I'd freeze in 20 minutes. I'd end up like the guy in the Toyota, a statue. I grabbed the crowbar I keep under the seat. It's a 3-foot piece of hexagonal steel, heavy, honest. I killed the strobe lights. I left the headlights on to illuminate the door. I took a breath, held it, and killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. It pressed against my ears. No birds, no wind in the trees, just the tink, tink, tink of the cooling engine block. I opened the door and stepped out into the yard. The cold tried to kill me again, finding the gaps in my scarf, stinging my eyes. The ground was slick, covered in a sheet of ice that looked like black glass. I walked toward the open bay door, crowbar raised. My boots crunched. I ducked under the door and entered the barn. It was pitch black inside, except for the rectangle of light from my grader's headlights spilling onto the concrete floor. The air inside smelled of grease, diesel, and something else. Ozone? Like when a transformer blows up? "Sarah?" I whispered. I swept my flashlight beam across the bay. Truck 6 was there, a big international dump truck with a plow. The hood was up. Someone had been working on it. The tool chest was overturned, wrenches scattered across the floor like silver bones. Then I saw the office window. The office overlooks the bay floor, up a short flight of metal stairs. The glass window of the office was gone, shattered inward. I walked toward the stairs, stepping over a puddle of hydraulic fluid that had frozen into a purple slush. I climbed the stairs, the metal grating ringing under my boots. I reached the door frame of the office. I shined the light inside. The radio board was sparking, little blue arcs of electricity jumping between the knobs. The coffee pot had exploded. Sarah wasn't in her chair. I moved the light to the corner. There was a shape huddled against the filing cabinets. It was Sarah. She was wearing her heavy cardigan. She was sitting with her knees pulled to her chest. "Sarah," I said, stepping forward. She didn't move. I reached out and touched her shoulder. She rocked back. She was solid, frozen hard, but she wasn't shattered. Her face was frozen in a mask of absolute terror, mouth open in a silent scream. And in her hand, frozen tight to her grip, was a piece of paper. She had been writing something when the cold took her. I shined the light on the paper. The ink was frozen, but legible, scrawled in shaky, frantic letters. "Don't let the heat out. They see the heat. They eat the heat." I read it twice. They eat the heat. Suddenly, a sound echoed from the back of the warehouse, near the wash bay. Clang. Metal on concrete. Then a skittering sound, like claws on steel. I wasn't alone in the barn.
I looked down at the bay floor. My grader was sitting there, headlights cutting the gloom, a yellow island of safety. But the door to the grader was open, and between me and the grader, in the shadows of the tool benches, something unfolded itself. It was bigger than the one in the woods, translucent, jagged, silent. It turned its faceted head toward me. It turned toward the heat of my body. I gripped the crowbar. I was 20 feet in a metal box, and the only way down was past that thing. I looked at Sarah's frozen face. I looked at the note. They eat the heat. I reached over to the wall and did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the fire extinguisher.
The 10-pound ABC dry chemical extinguisher isn't a weapon, it's a distraction. But right then, holding that red canister, feeling the cold steel against my palm, it was the only card I had to play. The creature, let's call it a skidder for now, because I didn't have a scientific name for a nightmare made of ice and hate, was moving between the tool benches. It wasn't walking like an animal. It moved like a spider with broken legs, jerking and twitching, but covering ground terrifyingly fast. It clicked as it moved. Click, hiss, click. I looked at the note in Sarah's frozen hand again. They eat the heat. I wasn't just meat to this thing. I was a bonfire in a dark room. My body heat, radiating through my parka, was lighting me up like a beacon. I looked down at the extinguisher. The gauge was in the green. I pulled the pin. It made a sharp ting sound that echoed in the silent office. The skidder stopped. It reared up, its faceted head swiveling. It heard the pin. It was maybe 30 feet away at the bottom of the stairs. I didn't aim at the creature. I aimed at myself. It was a stupid, desperate idea born of panic and road crew logic. If I couldn't hide my heat behind a wall, maybe I could hide it behind a cloud. I squeezed the handle. The roar of the chemical discharge was deafening in the small office. A thick yellow cloud of monoammonium phosphate exploded outward. It choked the air instantly. It tasted like metallic chalk. I sprayed a wide arc across the doorway, creating a wall of particulate matter, and then I sprayed it down onto my own legs and chest. It wasn't cold like CO2, but the powder was dense. It created a visual and, I hoped, a sensory barrier. I threw the empty canister down the stairs. It clattered loudly, bouncing off the metal steps. Clang, clang, clang. The skidder shrieked. It was a sound I'll never forget, like grinding two sheets of jagged glass together. It lunged at the sound of the canister. I took the opening. I vaulted over the office railing, not the stairs, the railing. It was a 12-foot drop to the concrete floor of the bay. I hit the ground hard. My boots slipped on the hydraulic fluid and I went down on one knee. The impact jarred my teeth, shooting pain up my spine. But I didn't stop. I scrambled up, my boots scrabbling for traction on the ice-slicked concrete. My grader was 40 feet away. Its headlights were still on, two beams of holy light cutting through the yellow haze of the chemical powder. The door to the cab was still open, just as I had left it. I heard the skidder behind me. It had realized its mistake. It heard my boots. Click, 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 click. It was fast, faster than a man in winter gear. I didn't look back. You never look back. You look at the destination. 10 feet, 5 feet. I grabbed the handrail of the grader. It was freezing cold, burning my glove. I hauled myself up the steps, swinging my body weight into the cab. Something hit the rear tire of the grader. A heavy, solid thud. The whole machine rocked. I threw myself into the seat and grabbed the door handle. A claw,
long, translucent, and serrated like a steak knife hooked around the edge of the doorframe. It was inches from my face. It dripped a clear, viscous fluid that froze before it hit the floor mat. I didn't scream. I slammed the door. I put every ounce of my 240 pounds into it. The door severed the claw. It snapped off like a dry branch breaking. The rest of the creature slammed against the outside of the glass. I locked the latch. Then I deadbolted it. The skidder was pressed against the window. Up close, it was hideous. It didn't have skin. It had a carapace that looked like frosted quartz. Inside, I could see movement, fluids pulsing, but no organs I recognized, just a network of blue veins glowing faintly. It hammered on the glass. Bang, bang. This wasn't car glass. This was Caterpillar safety glass, laminate, polycarbonate, rated to take a rock impact at 60 miles an hour. It held, but a spiderweb crack appeared in the center. Not today, I growled. My hand found the ignition key. I twisted it.
The C9 engine roared to life, shaking the cab. The vibration felt good. It felt like power. I had heat again, or I would soon. But right now, I had a passenger on the outside of my hull trying to break in. The skidder was climbing. He was trying to get to the roof. It knew the exhaust stack was up there. It knew the heat was up there. I couldn't drive out. The bay door was only open 4 feet. If I rammed it, I might damage the hydraulic rams on the blade or shatter the windshield. I had to use the machine. I released the parking brake. I throttled up. The engine RPMs climbed to 1800. I grabbed the control lever for the moldboard, the main blade under the belly of the grader. I angled it sharp to the right. Then I grabbed the lever for the circle drive. That's the gear that spins the blade. But the creature was on the cab, not the ground. "Get off my rig," I snarled. I grabbed the lever for the articulation. A road grader isn't a rigid truck. It has a hinge in the middle, behind the cab. It allows the machine to crab walk, to turn tight corners. It allows the front half of the machine to swing left or right, independently of the back half. I slammed the articulation lever hard left. The massive hydraulic cylinders hissed. The entire front nose of the grader swung violently to the left. The sudden lateral G-force caught the skidder off guard. It lost its grip on the roof. It slid down the side of the cab, scrabbling for a hold on the mirror bracket. It fell onto the rear tandem tires. The massive spinning rubber tread caught its leg. I didn't wait. I shifted into reverse. The backup alarm started beeping. Beep, beep, beep. A ridiculous sound in a life-or-death fight, but protocol is protocol. I backed the grader up. The rear tires, wrapped in heavy steel chains, rolled over the creature. There was no squish, no splash of blood. There was a sound like driving over a pile of fluorescent light tubes. Crash, crinkle, snap. I felt the bump in the suspension. The 60,000-pound machine crushed the silica nightmare into powder. I kept backing up until I hit the back wall of the bay. Thud. I shifted to neutral. I sat there, breathing hard, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I looked out the back window. There was a pile of glittering dust and jagged shards on the floor. The blue glow was fading, flickering out like dying embers. It was dead, if it was ever alive. I didn't step out immediately. I gave it 10 minutes. I watched the corners of the room. I watched the pile of glass dust to see if it would reform like something out of a bad movie. It stayed dust. The adrenaline started to fade, replaced by the deep, aching cold of the situation. I checked my gauges. Engine temp, climbing slowly. It was up to 140 degrees. Fuel,
half tank, maybe 40 gallons. Outside temp, still reading those 3 dashes, M dash, dash, dash. I looked at the open bay door. The wind was blowing snow inside, creating a drift on the concrete floor. The cold was filling the barn. If I didn't seal this place up, the engine block would freeze eventually, even while running, or the fuel lines would gel. I had to close the door. I grabbed the crowbar again. I checked the flashlight. I opened the cab door. The air in the bay was significantly colder than before. It burned my exposed skin instantly. I pulled my scarf up over my nose. I walked to the pile of shards. I kicked one with my boot. It was light like pumice, but sharp. It cut a groove into the toe of my rubber boot. I walked to the bay door. The electric motor that lifts it was dead. Power was out, but these industrial doors have a chain hoist for manual operation. I grabbed the chain. It was ice-cold iron. I started to pull. Clack, clack, clack. The gear was frozen. I had to put my whole weight on it, hanging off the chain, jerking it down. Slowly, painfully, the heavy insulated door rattled down. Clack, 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 bang. It hit the floor. The wind stopped howling, replaced by the hollow echo of the barn. I was sealed in. I walked back to the grader and climbed inside. I didn't close the door yet. I needed supplies. The barn was a treasure trove if you knew where to look, and I knew every inch of this place. I spent the next hour scavenging. I moved fast, taking breaks inside the heated cab to warm my hands every 10 minutes. First, fuel. I found the manual pump for the slip tank in the back of the shop truck. I siphoned 20 gallons of diesel into jerry cans and hoisted them onto the walkway of the grader. I poured 10 gallons straight into my tank. I needed every drop. Second, warmth. I raided the welding bay. I grabbed 3 heavy fire-retardant welding blankets. They're thick, heavy fiberglass wool. I also grabbed a roll of duct tape and a box of heavy-duty shop rags. Fourth, sustenance. The vending machine in the break room. I smashed the glass with my crowbar. I didn't care about quarters. I filled the canvas tool bag with peanuts, jerky, candy bars, and Pop-Tarts. High calories. I grabbed a case of bottled water from the supply closet. Fourth, tools. I loaded my personal toolbox into the cab. Wrenches, sockets, screwdrivers, pliers, wire cutters. I also grabbed a cordless angle grinder and 4 spare batteries and a bolt cutter. I was turning the grader into a lifeboat.
I had a problem. Carbon monoxide. I couldn't run the grader inside the sealed barn without killing myself. But if I turned the engine off, the machine would freeze solid in an hour. I needed a snorkel. I found a 20-foot length of flexible exhaust tubing in the mechanics loft, the kind used for venting trucks when you work on them indoors. I climbed up onto the rear cowling of the grader. The heat from the engine was radiating up, keeping me warm as I worked. I clamped the hose over the grader's exhaust stack. I ran the other end of the man door, the small pedestrian door next to the big bay door. I cut a hole in the bottom of the man door with the angle grinder. Sparks flew, bright and hot. I shoved the hose through the hole and packed the gaps with shop rags and duct tape. Now the grader was breathing out into the night, but keeping its heat inside. I went back into the cab. I used the welding blankets to insulate the glass. I taped them over the side windows and the rear window. I left the front windshield open for visibility, but I created a curtain I could drop. It was like building a fort in the living room when I was a kid, except the floor was lethal and the monsters were real. I sat back in the operator's seat. It was cramped now with all the gear. The smell of peanuts and diesel was strong. I looked at the dashboard clock. 3:45 a.m. I looked up at the office window where Sarah was. I couldn't get her down. She was part of the room now. I whispered a prayer for her. She was a good woman. She always had a pot of coffee on. I ate a package of beef jerky, chewing slowly. My jaw hurt. I realized I had been clenching my teeth for 4 hours straight. I took the small notebook from my breast pocket. I keep a log, always have. Mileage, fuel, maintenance. I opened a new page. My pen was frozen, so I used a carpenter's pencil. Day 1. Event, the whiteout, the glass frost. Casualties, Sarah, driver of the Toyota. Threat, silica-based life forms, skitters, attracted to heat, vulnerable to kinetic impact. Status, barn secured, grader running. Fuel, 85%. Temp, unknown, below -60. I put the pencil down. I turned off the cab lights. The only illumination came from the faint green glow of the instrument panel and the flashlight I kept in my lap. I listened. Outside the heavy steel walls of the barn, the wind was picking up. It sounded different than a normal blizzard. It sounded like sandblasting. The ice crystals were stripping the paint off the siding. And underneath the wind, I heard them. Chime, scrape, hiss. Not one, dozens. They were outside. They could smell the heat of the generator, or the residual heat of the building, or maybe they could smell me. I gripped the crowbar. Let 'em scratch, I whispered to the empty cab. I'm in 40 tons of American steel. But deep down, I knew the barn was just a temporary shell. The cold would seep in, the walls would buckle, the fuel would run out. I couldn't stay here. I looked at the map of the county I had taped to the sun visor. The road commission had a main hub, a massive underground facility for storing salt and heavy machinery, built into the side of the Iron Range. It was 30 miles west. It had geothermal heating. It had a reinforced bunker. 30 miles. In a normal blizzard, that's an hour drive. In this, it was a voyage to the moon. But I had the machine. I had the V-plow. I closed my eyes just for a second. The vibration of the diesel engine rocked me, a lullaby of combustion. Tomorrow, I would have to open that door. Tomorrow, I would have to push back the whiteout. I woke up because the cold found a way in. I had slept maybe 3 hours, curled up in the operator's seat with my head against the side window. Even with the welding blankets taped up, the glass was radiating a chill that felt radioactive. My breath had frozen into a layer of frost on my beard, gluing the hairs together. I sat up, my joints popping. The diesel engine was still idling, thank God. A steady, rhythmic chug, chug, chug that vibrated through the floorboards. The fuel gauge had dropped another notch. I peeled back the corner of the welding blanket covering the windshield. I expected gray. I expected the gloom of a storm. I wasn't ready for the light. It was blinding, absolutely searing white. I had to squint and shield my eyes with a gloved hand. The sun was up, but it wasn't the sun I knew. It was surrounded by 3 distinct halos, parhelia, or sundogs, but magnified. The air outside was so full of ice crystals that the atmosphere had turned into a massive lens. The light fractured into prisms, painting rainbows across the drifts of snow. But it was the texture of the world that stopped my heart. The snow wasn't soft. It didn't look like powder. It looked like salt. It looked like crushed diamonds. It had drifted against the chain-link fence of the yard, burying it almost to the razor wire. The drifts were sculptured, sharp-edged, swooping in curves that looked like frozen waves. And everything was still. No birds, no squirrels,
No wind moving the trees. The pine trees beyond the fence looked like they had been dipped in liquid glass. They were bent under the weight, shimmering with a terrifying beauty. I scanned the yard. No skitters. Maybe they were nocturnal. Maybe the UV light hurt them. Or maybe they were just waiting. I checked the thermometer. Still 3 dashes. Dash, dash, dash. The sensor was simply incapable of registering this reality. "Okay, old girl," I whispered to the grader, patting the steering wheel. "Time to earn your keep." I had to prep the machine for the outside. I unhooked the exhaust snorkel I'd jury-rigged the night before. I pulled the hose back into the cab and stuffed the hole in the man door with a wad of rags. Then came the hard part, the main bay door. I couldn't just drive through it. If I rammed the door, the steel roller tracks might buckle and jam, trapping me halfway. Or worse, the impact could shatter the hydraulic lines on my front plow. I had to open it manually again. I grabbed the crowbar. I checked the shotgun. Sarah kept a 12-gauge pump in the locker for rabid animals. I had grabbed it during my scavenging run. It was loaded with birdshot, useless against a tank, but better than bad language. I stepped out of the cab. The air in the barn was freezing, but it was dead air, stagnant. I walked to the chain hoist. I looked at the pile of glass dust where I had crushed the creature. It was still there. No regeneration. Good. I grabbed the chain. I hauled on it. Clack, clack, clack. The door rose, inch by screaming inch. As the gap at the bottom widened, the sunlight spilled in across the concrete floor. It was sharp, precise light. When the door was up 6 feet, I tied off the chain. I didn't walk out. I ran back to the grader. I didn't like the silence. The silence felt heavy, like the air before a lightning strike.
I climbed in, locked the door, and throttled up. Let me explain the setup. On the front of the 140M, I have a V-plow. It looks like the bow of a battleship, a massive steel wedge designed to split deep snow and throw it to both sides. Under the belly, between the front and rear wheels, is the mold board, the 12-foot blade for scraping and leveling. I dropped the V-plow. Usually, you float the plow just an inch off the gravel to save the cutting edge. Today, I set it to float, letting the full weight of the steel rest on the ground. I shifted into second gear. Here we go. I eased the clutch out. The 6 massive tires began to roll. We crossed the threshold of the barn. Crunch. The moment the V-plow hit the drifts in the yard, the sound was wrong. Usually, hitting a drift sounds like whoomp, a soft, muffled impact. This sounded like I had driven into a pile of gravel and broken glass. Scree! The grader shuddered. The engine RPMs dropped instantly as the resistance hit. This wasn't snow. It was a semi-solid abrasive. It was heavy, incredibly heavy. I slammed the throttle forward. "Push!" I yelled. The turbocharger whined, a high-pitched scream, as the diesel engine poured torque into the drivetrain. Black smoke poured out of the stack. The chains on the rear tires clawed at the concrete, striking sparks, fighting for traction. Slowly, agonizingly, the machine moved forward. The V-plow acted like a chisel. It shattered the drift. Massive chunks of white, hard material flew off to the left and right, clattering against the fence and the siding of the building. I broke through the first drift and rolled out into the yard. The cold hit the glass of the cab. Even with the welding blankets, I felt the temperature drop 10 degrees in seconds.
The heater fan was screaming on high, but the windows started to frost up at the corners immediately. I steered toward the gate. The gate was open. I'd left it that way last night. I lined up the nose of the grader with the road. County Road 550. It was gone. There was no road, just a flat white expanse of sparkling dunes stretching into the tree line. The ditches were filled, the guardrails were buried. The only way I knew where the road lay was the gap in the tree canopy overhead. I was breaking trail. I dropped the wing plow on the right side to widen my path. I engaged the differential lock, all 6 wheels locked together. I drove out of the sanctuary of the barn and into the whiteout.
Driving a grader is usually about finesse. You listen to the engine. You feel the road through the levers. This was about brute force. I was making 3 miles an hour, top speed. Every 100 yards, the grader would bog down. The V-plow would hit a patch of this silica snow that was denser than the rest, and the machine would buck, the nose rising up, the tires spinning. I had to feather the throttle, work the articulation to wiggle the frame and claw my way through. The noise was maddening. The snow screamed as I cut it, a high-pitched resonance that vibrated my teeth. I passed the first landmark, the intersection with CR 510. There was a stop sign there, or there used to be. Now there was just a metal pole, snapped off 2 feet from the ground. The sign itself was gone, likely shattered by the wind or the cold. I looked to my left. There was a house set back from the road. The miller's place. I knew them. Nice folks. The house was wrong. The siding, which was vinyl, had shattered. It lay in a pile at the base of the walls, exposing the Tyvek wrap underneath. The windows were blown out. But on the front porch, I saw something. It was a dog, a golden retriever. It was standing on the porch, looking out at the road. I slowed down. "Hey, buddy," I whispered, reaching for the window crank before remembering I couldn't open it. Then I got closer. The dog wasn't standing. It was frozen mid-stride, one paw raised. Its fur looked wet, matted down, but it was rigid. As the vibration of the grader's engine hit the house, the dog tipped over. It didn't go limp. It fell like a statue. It hit the wooden deck. Smash! It broke into 3 pieces. The legs snapped off. The head rolled away. It was solid ice all the way through. I looked away. I focused on the road. Don't look at the houses. Don't look at the porches. I kept pushing. The V-plow threw up a wake of white shards. I was carving a canyon in the world. Then, about 2 miles out from the depot, the road takes a sharp turn near the river bridge. The bridge deck is elevated. The wind hits it hard. As I rounded the bend, I saw the obstruction. A semi-truck, a logging hauler. It had jackknifed across the bridge, blocking both lanes. The trailer was hanging precariously over the guardrail, suspended above the frozen river below. The logs had spilled, massive frozen pine trunks scattered across the asphalt like spilled matches. I couldn't go around. The ditches were 10 feet deep with snow. I couldn't push the logs. They would jam into the V-plow and break my hydraulics. I had to clear them. I stopped the grader, about 50 feet back. I idled. Okay, Elias, think. I could use the blade to nudge the logs one by one, but that meant delicate work. I scanned the bridge. The sunlight was refracting off the steel trusses of the bridge. It was beautiful and deadly. And then I saw the movement. Under the trailer, in the shadows of the twisted metal, something uncoiled. It wasn't a skidder. It was smaller, maybe the size of a cat,
but with too many legs. It scurried along the underside of the trailer frame, upside down. Then another one, and another. They were swarming the truck. I realized then why the truck had jackknifed. It wasn't the ice. I grabbed the binoculars from my bag. I focused on the cab of the truck. The driver's door was gone, ripped off. The cab was empty, no body, no statue, just red stains frozen onto the gray upholstery. They eat the heat. The truck engine was cold now. The heat was gone, so the scavengers were leaving. But here I was, 60,000 pounds of hot iron and diesel exhaust. I saw the heads of the small creatures turn. They didn't have the big, faceted crystal heads of the large one. They had sleek, smooth heads like bullets made of quartz. They started moving towards me, scurrying across the frozen logs. I had to move that timber, now. I didn't have time for finesse. I lifted the V-plow. I lowered the mold board, the belly blade, and angled it sharply to the right. I wasn't going to gently nudge the logs. I was going to use the grader like a battering ram. I shifted into third gear. Too high for plowing, but I needed momentum. Hang on, I gritted out. I floored it. The grader leaped forward. The small creatures were halfway to me now, covering the distance with terrifying speed. They moved like fluid, flowing over the obstacles. I hit the first log. Bam! The impact threw me against the harness. The blade caught the timber and snapped it like a toothpick. The grader shuddered, but the weight carried me through. I hit the main pile. Crash, grind, snap! Logs flew off the bridge, tumbling into the frozen river below. I saw one of the creatures get caught between the blade and a pine trunk. It burst into a cloud of white dust, but the others jumped. I saw them land on the cowling of the engine. 3 of them. They were scratching at the metal, trying to find a seam, trying to find the heat. I hit the semi-truck trailer. I aimed for the rear axles. I needed it to swing it out of the way. The nose of the grader slammed into the trailer wheels. Metal screamed against metal. The trailer swung violently, screeching across the ice, and slammed into the bridge truss. It opened a gap, maybe 8 feet wide, enough for the grader. I punched through the gap. The creatures on the hood were clawing at the intake vents. If they got into the engine compartment, they could sever a belt or clog the radiator. I looked ahead. The road straightened out after the bridge. I needed speed. I kept the throttle pinned. The grader roared, spewing black smoke. The vibration was intense. One of the creatures lost its grip on the smooth yellow paint. It slid off the side and vanished under the rear tires. Crunch! The other 2 held on. I reached for the lever for the wing plow, the side wing. I raised it up, then slammed it down. Clang! The impact shook the whole frame. It startled the creatures. One of them jumped, straight at the windshield. It hit the glass right in front of my face. It stuck there, suctioned on by some kind of freezing secretion. I looked right into its face. No eyes, just a swirling, milky center in the crystal. Mandibles clicking against the polycarbonate. It started to vibrate. It was trying to resonate the glass, trying to shatter it. I saw the crack from last night expand, just a fraction of an inch. Get off! I grabbed the windshield wiper knob. I twisted it. The heavy-duty wiper arm swept across the glass. It hit the creature. The creature was solid, heavy. The wiper arm bent. The motor groaned. And then, snap, the wiper arm broke off. But the force dislodged the thing. It tumbled backwards over the cab and was gone. I was across the bridge. I was clear. But the crack in the windshield was bigger now, a jagged line running from the bottom center right up to my eye level.
I slowed down, dropping back to second gear. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I checked the gauges. Fuel, dropping faster than it should. I was burning it hard. Temp, engine was running hot, 210 degrees. The radiator was probably clogged with snow and ice dust. I had 28 miles to go, and I had just rung the dinner bell for every frozen nightmare in the valley.
The machine was running a fever. I didn't need the digital display to tell me. I could feel it through the floorboards. The C9 engine was usually a steady, rhythmic thrum, but now it had a jagged edge to it, a vibration that rattled the loose change in the cup holder. The dashboard glared at me with a red warning light. High coolant temp. The needle was pegging 225 degrees Fahrenheit. I cursed, slamming my gloved hand against the steering wheel. Come on, not now. Do not overheat on me now. The problem was simple physics. The V-plow was shattering the silica snow, creating a cloud of fine, abrasive dust. That dust was being sucked into the front grille, packing the radiator fins tight. The grater was suffocating. It couldn't breathe. If the computer sensed the heat getting any higher, it would go into derate mode. It would cut my power by 50% to save the engine. If I lost power in these drifts, I stopped. If I stopped, the heat died. If the heat died, I died. I was entering the cut. It's a 5-mile stretch where the road was blasted through a granite ridgeline. The trees here are old-growth white pines and hemlocks, growing so thick they weave together over the road. In summer, it's a beautiful green tunnel. Now, it was a tomb. The sun, which had been blindingly bright in the open fields, vanished. The canopy overhead was a solid roof of frozen needles and branches. The light turned a dim, bruised purple. The temperature inside the cab dropped instantly. I checked the temp gauge again. 228 degrees. I couldn't ignore it. I had to clean the radiator. I scanned the road ahead. The drifts were deep, maybe 4 feet here, sheltered from the wind. I needed a spot where the trees were set back, giving me a 360-degree view. I saw a widening in the road, an old logging turnout. I pulled the grader over, angling the nose toward the center of the road so I could take off fast if I had to. I throttled down to an idle. The warning beep stopped, but the red light stayed on. Okay, pit stop, 2 minutes, in and out. I prepared like I was going for a spacewalk. I zipped the high-vis parka, tightened the scarf, pulled the hood up, put on a second pair of gloves. I grabbed the crowbar. I grabbed the shotgun. I grabbed a stiff bristled shop brush I kept under the seat. I looked out the windows. The orange construction mesh I'd bolted over the glass made the world look like a grid. Nothing moved in the purple gloom of the cut. No skitters, no swarms. Just the trees, standing like silent sentinels of glass. I unlocked the door. Stepping out of the cab felt like stepping onto another planet. The cold in the cut was different. It wasn't the stinging wind of the open fields. It was a heavy, sinking cold. It felt like the air pressure was crushing me. The silence was absolute. The snow under my boots didn't crunch. It squeaked, a high-pitched sound like styrofoam rubbing together. I moved to the back of the grader. The engine compartment is in the rear. I climbed up the tandem tires, balancing on the icy chains. I reached the rear grille. It was a solid wall of white. The ice dust had packed into the steel mesh so hard it looked like concrete. "Damn it," I whispered. The steam from my breath froze instantly, falling as snow on my jacket. I used the crowbar. I had to be careful. If I punctured the radiator core, game over. Clang, chip, scrap. I hammered at the ice pack. It flaked off in sheets. Underneath, I could see the aluminum fins of the radiator. They were steaming. The heat coming off the engine was intense, but the air swallowed it up inches from the metal.
I worked fast, frantically. My heart was pounding in my ears. Every second I was out here, I was exposed. I used the brush to sweep the loose dust out of the fins. Scrape, swoosh, scrape, swoosh. I cleared about 70% of the grill. That would have to do. I was about to jump down when I heard it. Crack. It sounded like a cannon shot. I froze, shotgun coming up to my shoulder, searching for a target. Crack. Boom. Another one to my left. Then I saw it. A massive white pine, maybe 100 feet tall, simply exploded. It wasn't a bomb. It was the sap. The temperature had dropped so low, so fast, that the remaining sap inside the tree had expanded explosively. The trunk shattered. The tree fell. It didn't fall like wood. It fell like a glass tower. It hit the road about 50 yards behind the grader. Smash. The sound was unbelievable, a cacophony of shattering crystal. Millions of shards of frozen wood and needles sprayed into the air, glittering in the dim light. Then another tree further back. Pop. The forest was committing suicide. The cold was too much even for the trees. I realized with a jolt of terror that one of those trees fell on the grader. It wouldn't just dent the cab, it would crush it flat. The rollover protection structure, ROPS, is rated for a rollover, not a direct hit from 100 tons of shattering timber. Move! I yelled at myself. I threw the brush into the snow. I jumped down from the tandems, slipping on the ice, banging my knee against the rim. I scrambled back to the cab. As I reached for the handle, I saw something in the snowbank across the road. A footprint. Not a skidder print. Skidders leave sharp, triangular punctures. This was a boot print, a heavy, insulated boot, dragging. It led away from the road, into the trees. I hesitated, just for a heartbeat. The instinct to help, to search, flared up. Crack! Another tree exploded, closer this time. A branch the size of a telephone pole slammed into the snow 10 feet from the nose of the grader. I yanked the door open and dove inside.
I locked the door and throttled up immediately. The temp gauge was already dropping. 210, 205, 200. The airflow was back. I put the grader in 4th gear. I had to get out of the cut. The trees were bombs waiting to go off. I drove with one eye on the road and one eye on the canopy. Every time I heard a pop, I flinched, waiting for the roof to cave in. I pushed hard for 3 miles. The V-plow churned the snow. The engine roared. Finally, the trees began to thin out. The purple gloom lightened to a pale, sickly gray. I was coming up on the junction with the old logging road that led toward the bunker entrance. That's when I saw the blockade. It wasn't logs. It was vehicles. Humvees, 3 of them, and a 1.5-deuce transport truck, painted in woodland camo. National Guard. They were parked in a defensive formation, blocking the road. I slowed the grader. I didn't want to. I wanted to blow past them, but the gap was too narrow. I rolled closer, keeping the blade low. The vehicles were covered in a thick layer of the diamond frost. They looked like they had been there for 100 years, not, 2 days? I stopped 20 feet away. I grabbed the binoculars. The turret on the lead Humvee was manned. A soldier was up there, hands on the .50 caliber machine gun. He was a statue. His helmet was frosted white. His shoulders were covered in snow. He was leaning forward, sighting down the barrel. But the gun, the barrel of the M2 Browning, was split, peeled back like a banana. He had tried to fire. The metal of the barrel had been so cold, and the heat of the round so intense,
that the weapon had catastrophically failed. I scanned the other vehicles. Doors open. No bodies on the ground. They eat the heat. They had been pulled out, taken. I looked at the deuce-and-a-half. The canvas cover on the back was shredded, ribbons of fabric frozen in the wind. Inside the truck bed, I saw shapes, lumps, supplies, or bodies. I needed fuel. I had half a tank, but the bunker was still 20 miles away, and the snow was getting deeper. A military truck would have diesel, lots of it. But it was a trap. I knew it in my gut. You don't leave a buffet untouched. The Skidders had cleared this convoy. They knew it was here. They might still be here, digesting. I looked at the fuel gauge. 35%. I looked at the convoy. I made a choice. A coward's choice. Or a survivor's choice. I put the grader in reverse. I backed up 100 yards. Then I dropped the V-plow and the wing. I shifted into third gear. Sick fracks, I whispered. I wasn't going to stop and siphon gas. I was going to punch a hole. I floored it. The grader picked up speed. 10 miles an hour, 15, 20. The V-plow was designed to push snow, but it's backed by 40,000 pounds of thrust. I aimed for the gap between the first Humvee and the truck. Impact. The impact threw me forward against the steering wheel. My seatbelt locked, bruising my collarbone. The V-plow caught the rear bumper of the Humvee. It didn't crumple, it shattered. The metal was so brittle, it fragmented. The Humvee spun violently, sliding into the ditch. The wing cloud caught the side of the transport truck. It sheared the fuel tank off. I saw the diesel spill out. It didn't flow. It fell like slush, purple slush. I kept my foot pinned to the floor. The grader groaned, tire spinning, chains biting into the asphalt beneath the ice. We ground our way through the wreckage. I heard the crunch, crunch, crunch of military hardware being pulverized under my wheels. And then we were through. I looked back in the mirror. The convoy was scattered, a graveyard of glass and steel. But as I watched, I saw movement in the wreckage. From the back of the shredded transport truck, shapes were emerging. Not skidders, people, or what used to be people. They were wearing fatigues, but they moved wrong, jerky, twitchy. They stumbled out of the truck bed. They didn't run after me. They couldn't run. They were frozen solid, animated by something else. One of them, the soldier from the turret, fell off the Humvee. He hit the ground and broke apart. His torso crawled after me, dragging itself by its arms. Zombies? I laughed, a hysterical, terrified laugh. Zombie ice. Great, just great. I turned my eyes forward. I didn't want to know. I had cleared the cut. I had cleared the convoy. But I had damaged the plow. I could feel it. The steering was pulling hard to the left. I had bent a hydraulic ram or twisted the frame. And the sun was going down.
The sunset was the worst part. In the summer, sunsets up here are purple and orange, beautiful. This sunset was the color of a bruise. The sky turned a deep necrotic violet. The glass frost effect amplified the fading light, making the snow glow with a faint bioluminescent pulse. I was on the plains now, a long, flat stretch of road surrounded by farmland, no windbreak. The wind hit the grader broadside. Wham! The machine rocked. This wasn't wind, this was a gale. The snow wasn't falling down anymore. It was flowing horizontally, a river of white abrasive dust flowing across the road. Visibility dropped to 0. I was driving by instrument flight rules now. I kept my eyes on the GPS screen, following the blue line of the road. Beep, beep. A new alarm. Hydraulic pressure low. I looked at the gauge. The pressure for the moldboard was dropping. I had blown a hose when I hit the convoy. If I lost hydraulic pressure, I lost the steering. The 140M uses hydraulic steering. No fluid, no turn. I was leaking the grader's lifeblood onto the ice. Hold together, I begged. Just 10 more miles. Just get me to the bunker. But the grader was sluggish. The steering wheel felt mushy. I had to turn at a full rotation just to correct a drift. And then, out of the violet darkness, I saw the lights. Not the bunker lights. Green lights. Faint, pulsing, phosphorescent lights. They were floating in the fields, hovering about 10 feet off the ground. There were dozens of them, moving parallel to the road, pacing me. I realized with a sick feeling what they were. They were the eyes, or the sensors of the big ones, the striders. The herd was migrating, and I was driving right into the middle of it. A hydraulic leak sounds like a dying animal. It's a high-pitched scream as the pump tries to compress air instead of fluid. The steering wheel in my hands went limp. 1 second, I was fighting the resistance of the tires. The next, the wheel spun freely, disconnected from reality. "No! No! No!" I roared, slamming my fist against the dash. The grader was drifting. Without the hydraulic pressure to hold the front wheel straight, the V-plow caught a ridge of ice and pulled the whole machine to the left, toward the deep ditch, toward the open field, toward the green lights. I hit the brakes. The air brakes still worked. Thank God they're a separate system. But stopping a 60,000-pound sled on ice isn't instant. We skidded. The grader rotated, sliding sideways. The rear tires slammed into the lip of the ditch. Wham! The machine tipped dangerously. The right side rose up, defying gravity for a terrifying second before slamming back down. The engine sputtered, gulped fuel, and leveled out. I was dead in the water. I killed the headlights instantly. I didn't think. Instinct took over. Hide. I sat in the dark. The only light came from the dashboard instruments and the violet glow of the sky outside. And the green lights. I looked out the side window. The orange construction mesh broke the view into diamonds, but I could see them. They were tall, impossibly tall. The striders. They were passing the grader. Their legs were thin, translucent pillars, maybe 20 feet long, ending in sharp points that pierced the snow without making a sound. Their bodies were suspended high above the ground, floating in the blizzard. And the green lights, they weren't eyes. They were sacks of bioluminescent fluid hanging from their undersides, pulsing with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Thrum, thrum, thrum. I held my breath. I stopped breathing. I willed my heart to stop beating. One of them stepped over me. I looked up through the skylight I had covered with a blanket. I couldn't see it, but I could feel the displacement of the air. I heard a sound like wind chimes made of heavy crystal swaying in a breeze. Chime, clack, chime. It paused. It was standing right over me. The green light filtered down through the cracks in my window masking. It was sensing, listening, smelling. I looked at the temperature gauge. The engine was still running. I couldn't turn it off. If I turned it off now, with the battery weak and the cold this deep, it would never start again. And the noise, the diesel clatter, was deafening in the silence. Why didn't it attack? Then I realized
The vibration. The Striders were creatures of resonance. They shattered glass. They shattered trees. They sensed the high-frequency vibrations of life, the heartbeat, the breathing, the panic. The greater was a low-frequency rumble, a steady mechanical thrum. To them, I wasn't prey. I was just a rock, a rumbling, warm rock. The Strider moved on. Its long leg lifted, and it stepped across the ditch, vanishing into the violet, swirling snow. I let out a breath that shuddered through my whole body. But I had a bigger problem. I was stuck. The steering was dead. The fluid was gone. I needed a transplant. I grabbed my flashlight and the schematics manual from the glove box. I studied the hydraulic diagram under the dim map light. The 140M has multiple hydraulic circuits: steering, brakes, moldboard, wing plow, scarifier. They all run off the main pump, but they have separate lines. I had blown a line, probably the main pressure line to the steering orbital. That meant all the fluid had pumped out onto the snow. But I wasn't empty. The cylinder still held fluid. The wing plow cylinder, the moldboard lift cylinders, they were full of oil. I didn't have a drum of spare fluid, but I had the machine itself. Cannibalizing, I whispered. I had to sacrifice the wing plow. If I disconnected the return lines from the wing plow and the scarifier and drained that fluid back into the reservoir, I might get enough pressure to steer. But I had to do it from the outside. I looked at the window. The herd of Striders was moving away, down the road, but they were always stragglers. I had to go out. I prepped my tools: 2 adjustable wrenches, a bucket, a funnel, and a roll of rescue tape, self-fusing silicone tape. I unlocked the door. Click. I pushed it open. The cold was sharper now. It felt personal. It bit into the exposed skin around my eyes like acid. I climbed down the ladder. My boots sank into the purple slush of the spilled hydraulic fluid. It was everywhere, a crime scene of oil. I crawled under the belly of the machine. I lay on my back in the snow. The massive steel blade hung above me, tons of metal held up by hydraulic locks that could fail at any second. I found the blown hose. It was the steering feed, just like I thought, a gash in the rubber, probably from a piece of debris I kicked up. I wrapped it with rescue tape, layer after layer, stretching it tight until it fused into a solid rubber cast. It wouldn't hold full pressure, but it might hold enough to limp home. Now for the fluid. I moved to the side of the machine, to the wing plow. I cracked the fitting on the hydraulic ram. Hiss. Red oil dribbled out. I caught it in the bucket. It was thick like syrup. I moved to the next cylinder and the next, milking the machine of its own blood. I worked for 20 minutes. My hands were numb inside my gloves. My movements were clumsy. I dropped a wrench once, and the clang sounded like a gunshot. I froze, waiting for the wind chimes. Nothing came. I got maybe 3 gallons of fluid. It wasn't enough to fill the tank, but it was enough to prime the pump. I climbed up the back of the grader to the hydraulic tank filler neck. I poured the syrup in. "Drink up," I chattered, my teeth clicking together uncontrollably. "Please, just drink it." I capped the tank. I threw the bucket into the snow. I climbed back into the cab. My body temperature had dropped dangerously. I was shaking so hard I couldn't get the key into the ignition for a second. I sat there, hyperventilating, waiting for the heat of the cab to soak back into my layers. "Okay," I said. "Test time." I throttled up. I turned the steering wheel. It groaned, it shuddered, but the wheels turned. Yes! I shifted in reverse. I locked the differential. "Come on, pull!" The grader clawed at the ditch. The chains bit. The engine roared. We lurched backwards, up onto the road surface. We were alive, but we were crippled. I couldn't use the plow blade anymore. I didn't have enough fluid to lift it if I dropped it.
I had to keep it raised. I was no longer a plow. I was just a truck. If I hit a drift I couldn't smash through, it was over.
The last 10 miles were a hallucination. I was hypothermic. I knew the signs. Confusion, drowsiness, a feeling that maybe I should just stop and take a nap. I bit my tongue until I tasted copper to stay awake. The striders had moved on, but the landscape had changed. The road was littered with statues, deer, a pack of wolves, birds that had fallen from the sky mid-flight, all frozen, all shattered. I drove through a garden of crystal death. Then the terrain started to rise. The Iron Range. The GPS indicated I was 2 miles from the bunker entrance. The radio crackled. Not static. A voice. Any station? This is Iron Hub, monitoring frequency. It was weak. Barely a whisper. I grabbed the mic. My hand was shaking so bad I almost dropped it. Iron Hub? This is County 4. This is Elias. I'm on the approach road. Do you copy? Silence. Then, County 4. Elias? My God. We thought the surface was scrubbed. What is your status? I'm damaged. Taking on cold. Fuel critical. I have visuals on the hostiles. Large ones. Green lights. Copy, County 4. Listen to me. The main gate is sealed. We cannot open it. It's frozen shut and we have hostiles perimeter side. My heart sank. What? You can't let me in? Negative on the main gate. You have to go to the exhaust tunnel. The ventilation shaft on the north ridge. It's a service ramp. We can blow the grate from the inside. But Elias. What? The ridge is steep, and it's uncleared. You have to climb a 15% grade in deep powder. I looked at the dashboard. Fuel, empty light flashing. Hydraulics, whining. I looked at the road ahead. It climbed sharply up the mountain. I have a 140M, I said. It climbs walls. We will be waiting with charges on the grate. You have to hit it fast, Elias. If you stall on the ramp, you're dead. You have to ram the grate at speed. Copy that. Ramming speed. I hung up the mic. I lined up the grater. The road up the ridge was a white ribbon going straight up into the dark sky. I shifted into the lowest gear. I engaged the all-wheel drive. One last push. Don't die on me now. I floored the accelerator. The grater hit the incline. The engine screamed. The tires spun, fought, and caught. We started to climb. But halfway up, I saw them, guarding the tunnel entrance. 2 skidders, the big ones with the crystal heads. They were standing right in front of the ventilation grate. They were waiting for the heat to come out of the mountain. They turned and looked at me. I didn't have a plow to drop. I didn't have a weapon. I just had 60,000 pounds of momentum and a desperate man behind the wheel. I kept my foot down. Gravity is a cruel mistress. On a 15% grade, 60,000 pounds of steel wants to slide backward, not go forward. The grater clawed at the mountain. I could feel the tires slipping, catching, slipping again. The chains were tearing chunks out of the frozen earth beneath the snow. Come on. Come on. The engine temperature warning was screaming again. The oil pressure light flickered. The machine was dying. It was burning its own guts to give me these last few yards. I stared through the shattered, mesh-covered windshield. The 2 skidders stood their ground. They weren't afraid. Why would they be? They were the apex predators of this new ice age. They shrieked, a sound that vibrated the fillings in my teeth and spread their mandibles. I didn't lift my foot. "Iron hub!" I yelled into the dead mic. "Fire in the hole!" I was 50 feet away. 40. 30. The lead skidder lunged. It leaped straight at the cab. I didn't flinch. I didn't swerve. I held the wheel dead straight. Impact. The creature hit the V-plow first. It didn't splash. It shattered. It exploded into a cloud of razor-sharp mist. Then the ventilation grate, a massive grid of heavy steel bars set into the concrete face of the mountain. At the exact second I hit the grate, a flash of light bloomed from the inside. The bunker crew blew the explosive bolts. Boom! Crash! The explosion weakened the steel, but the grater finished the job. The noise was absolute. The sound of metal tearing, glass breaking, and stone crumbling. The world turned upside down. The grater smashed through the grate, airborne for a split second before slamming down onto the concrete floor of the tunnel. We skidded. Sparks showered like fireworks, illuminating the dark tunnel walls. The machine groaned, twisted, and slid sideways, grinding against the tunnel wall before finally, violently coming to a halt. The engine coughed once, twice, and then silence. I didn't move. I couldn't. My hands were frozen into claws around the steering wheel. My forehead was resting against the shattered safety glass. I could taste blood. I must have bitten my tongue during the crash. For a long moment, I thought I was dead. I thought this was the afterlife, a dark tunnel smelling of diesel and dust. Then, light. Harsh, yellow tactical lights cut through the smoke, beams sweeping over the wreckage of the grater. Voices, muffled at first, then clearer. "Clear! Radiation negative! Temperature stable! Check the cab! Get the jaws!" I saw figures in heavy yellow hazmat suits swarming the machine. They looked like astronauts. Someone ripped the door open. The latch I'd bolted shut was twisted metal now. "Driver, can you hear me?" A face behind a clear visor, eyes wide with shock. "Yeah," I croaked. My voice sounded like gravel. "I hear you. Don't try to move. We've got you." They pulled me out. It hurt. Every muscle in my body screamed as they dragged me from the seat. My legs wouldn't work. They laid me on a stretcher. As they strapped me in, I looked back at the grater. It was a ruin. The V-plow was crumpled like tin foil. The front axle was snapped. Fluid, hydraulic oil, coolant, diesel, pooled on the tunnel floor like a rainbow bloodstain. The cab was crushed on the left side. It had given everything. It had carried me through hell and delivered me to the doorstep of survival. "Good girl," I whispered. Tears froze on my cheeks. "Good girl." They carried me down the tunnel. Behind us, I heard the heavy thud, thud, thud of blast doors sealing. The wind was locked out. The cold was locked out. I passed out.
Waking up, hurt. It wasn't the injuries, just bruises and a mild concussion. It was the thaw. When you've been that cold for that long, warming up feels like burning. My nerves were firing all at once. My hands felt like they were on fire. I was in a cot, a medical bay. Low concrete ceilings, exposed pipes. The air smelled of recycled oxygen and antiseptic. A man was standing over me. He wore gray fatigues with a patch on the shoulder. Iron Hub Engineering. "You're awake," he said. He didn't smile. People don't smile much anymore.
I'm Commander Vance. You're the one who drove the grader? I nodded. Elias, County Road. Vance shook his head slowly. We watched you on the perimeter cameras. That was insane. We thought you were dead 5 times over. I had a job to do, I said. I pushed snow. Vance handed me a cup of water. It was lukewarm. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. We checked your machine, Vance said. We're stripping it for parts. The engine block is cracked, but the transmission is salvageable. We can use the steel. I flinched. It felt like he was talking about an organ donor. But he was right. In this world, nothing goes to waste. What is this place? I asked. Salt mine, Vance said. Converted in the 80s for continuity of government. We have geothermal power. We have water. We have hydroponics. And now, thanks to you, we know what's out there. The skitters, the striders. Silica-based life forms, Vance nodded. We're calling them Vitrum. They thrive in absolute zero. They consume thermal energy. We're safe down here, as long as the blast doors hold and the core stays hot. He paused, looking at my hands. We need operators, Elias. We have heavy equipment down here. Loaders, excavators, drills. We're expanding the tunnels. We're digging deeper toward the magma warmth. We need men who can make machinery talk. I looked at my hands. They were bandaged, scarred, trembling slightly, but they were still strong. I sat up. The pain flared, but I pushed it down. Point me to the rig, I said. The world above is gone. I know that now. The glass frost didn't just freeze the land. It changed it. It belongs to them now. The things of ice and silence. The highways I used to clear are buried under dunes of diamond dust. The towns are mausoleums. But down here, in the dark, the engine still runs. We are the moles. We are the worms in the earth. We dig. We build. We survive. Sometimes when I'm operating the loader in the deep shafts, hauling rock, I close my eyes and I can still hear the wind. I can hear the chime of the striders walking over the surface, miles above my head. They can have the sky, they can have the wind, but they can't have the heat. We keep the fire, we keep the work. My name is Elias. I used to push snow. Now I push rock. If you're listening to this broadcast, if you're out there in the white, huddled over a dying engine or a fading fire, don't look at the lights. Don't listen to the wind chimes. Dig. Find a hole. Get deep. Because the cold is patient, but we have to be stubborn. This is County 4, signing off.